What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Indie Inkwell. My name is JJ, one of your two co-hosts. Unfortunately, Michael cannot make it this week, aka Longbox. He is in the process of moving. He and his wife just bought a new house, so congratulations to those two. But yeah, we are here. We've got a brand new guest for you guys today. Independent comic book writer and publisher, John Aviña. Is it Aviña or Aviña?
Aviña.
Okay, I thought it was because
It's a
I was
little,
like, I remember a little bit of Spanish class. Like, not much, but I remember that little part. But how's it
Yeah.
going, man?
It's going.
Good, good. So the first thing we like to do on our show every week is kind of get the guest origin story. How did you get into comic books? Did it start when you were a kid? Did it kind of develop after you got into adulthood? What was it that drew you in at first?
So I remember my first comic. It was the Bartman #1 from like this Bongo Simpsons comic.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, my dad was a trucker, so like I would get in the truck and we would do routes, and we stopped at like this little like 7-Eleven thing, and he was doing his delivery, and they had a spinner rack with like a couple of like Simpson comics and stuff, and I saw the Bartman, and I grabbed it, he bought it, and I read that thing to like shreds. And like from that point on, like I like comics, and it helped me like read and do all that fun stuff. And then as I got older, I kind of fell off. And then it was right when like Red Robin #1 came out. Mom was working at a bank that was right next to a comic book shop. So I just like walked over to kill time when I was picking her up one day in high school. And I bought it, and I was like, all right, well, let's see. And then I remember opening and be like, oh my God, Batman's dead. Like, what happened?
That's a way to get your attention real quick.
Yeah, I went back and I bought like Batman RIP. Like I bought everything that had happened like up until that point. So I caught up to everything. And from like then on, I was just like going to the shop every week to pick up books.
That's awesome. I don't think I haven't heard anybody say The Simpsons was their first comic book. That's definitely a new one.
Yeah, I'm a huge, like, even to this day, like me and my wife debated naming my son Bart, like Bartholomew, because I watch The Simpsons like every day. It's like my wind down show.
Okay,
So
I get you.
Yeah, so I even have that issue still. It's not like that original one that I had because it's dissolved.
Oh,
But
right.
I rebought it like when I started collecting. I saw it at the shop for like $4, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna buy it. So it's like one of the few comics that I like kept from my collecting days.
That's awesome though, dude.
Yeah.
Like first off, there's not a lot of people that have a copy of the first comic that they ever read. And then still the fact that it was The Simpsons, that's so cool. So,
Yeah.
but after The Simpsons, were there any like characters that you gravitated to specifically that like really like, oh, this is my guy?
Preacher. Like
Preacher.
I went to the comic book shop and I was asking the guy like, what's good? Like because I kind of got back into it and I was doing the superhero thing a little bit, but it was just like the heroes I knew. So
Right.
then I asked him like, well, what am I missing? He was like, Alan Moore Swamp Thing. You got to read Preacher. You got to read Constantine. So I like all of those and I still love them, but it was Preacher that I read. And I was like, oh, this is like weird. Like there's a guy named like Arseface, and like it's not even like ironic or anything. Like he's not making fun of it. It's just like he's just writing it as honest as possible. And
Right.
from like that on, I was like, comics can do whatever they want. And there's no one to tell them, like, I know there's editors, but I was like, no one to control you doing this weird thing. And that's kind of the point where I wanted to start creating them, because I was like, oh, it's just like an open format to tell stories.
Yeah, 100%. Like, and especially like, so you went basically straight from Simpsons and like Spider-Man headlong into indie stuff with Preacher.
Yeah. It kind of warped my thing too, because then every time something like I got kind of bored doing the superhero thing like time and time again, because it always felt like big event story, then reset, big event story, then reset.
Same thing right now, it feels like a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's
So
a lot of
I got
rinse
a
and
little,
repeat. Everybody hates each other. Rinse, repeat. Everybody hates each other. Like,
yeah. So I got burnt out. So then like the indie scene was helping. And it was the same time like Scott Snyder was doing American Vampire. And I started working at a comic shop at that time. So I got real jaded, like only reading Vertigo books, only reading like anything Image. And every
almost
time
becoming
somebody,
like sort of like a comic snob.
everyone that works at it, because even the guy that worked at the comic book shop still works there. So now that I go in there with like my own books because they're starting to carry them at that same store, like I'm talking to him about it, and I was like, "Yeah, man, like you're the one that told me to read like Preacher." He's like, "Oh, I was the worst then." Like that's all I. So and
He's
I
like, I was a horrible influence. What are you talking?
yeah, you go through that phase for sure. Cause like now when I go, like if there's a little kid that's like excited for like the third #1 Spider-Man to come out in like 2 months
Right.
for him. Like that, hey, like you're reading, that's all that matters.
100%.
Yeah,
Like, as
but
long as
like
you're
in my
picking up a book
heyday.
and actually getting into it, that's what matters.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's I don't know what it is about the superhero genre, but it is become like very, very bland.
Yeah. I think it's th they don't know how far to go because they don't want it to mess with like potential film properties, I think, for some of it. So they don't really let them go that route. Cause you know, like when the last Thor movie came out and they show the sword or whatever, and everyone's like, "Oh, they're gonna do what's the guy from Venom? Like Krull or whatever."
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like,
No.
"Well, that's gonna be the" yeah, no, they're like, "That's gonna be the next big Marvel villain," and everyone starts like speculating, and I was like, who knows, man? Like, let's just let it breathe. It doesn't always have to be this. Like, it doesn't always have to be the big cinematic issues. Like, I love like the smaller issues. Earlier today, I reread the issue where it's like a Johnny Storm's dead, and it's Franklin and it's Peter, and they're just having like a little back and forth moment about like their dead uncles. And I was like, this is like what I liked about comics, like these personal moments. And I think if more issues were this, readers wouldn't feel like burned out because it's not like a big cinematic, oh, someone's gonna die and come back. It's just like a beautiful moment between two characters. And I think that's what we are all kind of wanting, but we're afraid to
Mhm.
say it because we do like seeing people get like thrown through walls and stuff still.
Right. Well, I mean, and I don't understand why, like, it feels like they only want to do either or. They can't
Yeah.
blend the two very well, it seems like anymore.
Yeah. And I know it's a lot because like issue one sell out, issue two sell okay. By issue five, it's the people that are going to read it continuing that'll
Mhm.
jump on. So they're constantly like doing like soft reboots or switching up creative teams. Cause I missed like those long runs, like the Jeff Johns Green Lantern run, like that went on
Yes.
for years. And we got to grow, and I didn't have to like judge it per like issue because I knew like, oh, I'm going to be with this guy for a little while. So like, let's see what he does. But
Mhm.
now it's like you got 5 issues to tell your Spider-Man, and then you're probably not going to get that chance again. So like do everything you want to do in these 5 issues, and it's getting stuffed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few exceptions out there, of course, like the Harley Quinn
Yeah.
series that's been running right now. That had
Yeah.
Stephanie Phillips on it for I think 20 something issues until
And
very
she's great.
recently, and then Tenny Howard took over. So I mean, it's just banger after banger on creative team there.
Yeah. And I think
But
that goes to like the editors too. Like they know how to put teams together. And like Stephanie Phillips is great. And there's like a lot of really cool people still at DC doing things too, which
mhm.
I think is nice. Like they kind of give them a little bit more time to do their stuff. But I always feel like I'm waiting for the event to drop.
Yeah, and then with Marvel, it just seems like they've got the Ford Motor Company assembly line going, you know, like
Mhm.
it's just pump out books,
Yeah.
period.
Yeah, and then you got, like, resellers kinda making it worse, like, hopping in, buying up all, like, Spider-Man number 3s or whatever had Spider-Boy in it, and they're
Mm,
just like, "We're
that
gonna."
was interesting to see. The spec market overlap with that stuff is a very weird area to me. Like,
Yeah, because then I think they think, like it's kinda like the Morbius thing, they're like, "Oh, so many people are talking about it, they obviously want more," and I'm just like, "No, they're just, like, pumping everything into it for this one moment, and then it's gonna drop."
right, like I've seen some spec channels that are like, this comic just had 10 sales, CG's. I'm like, okay, 10 sales is not a trend.
Yeah.
Like, think about what you just said.
Yeah.
But I'm not, I don't know. I also don't pay attention to that side of the
Yeah.
hobby that much. So I'm much more of a reader and consumer of things than I am a let's get the most valuable thing I can find. Like,
That's the way I had a lot of Silver Age books for a while, but I would collect like the characters I liked, but I would just have them in regular bag and boards because I would actually read it once and then just let it sit.
Yeah.
I sold them all when I started writing comics, like to help fund the comics,
Yeah.
but there was like a handful that I kept because of like sentimental value.
Oh,
And
you
I was
got
like,
to.
yeah, but I did sell my first appearance of the Silver Surfer that was signed by Stan Lee.
Ooh, that one had to
Yeah,
hurt.
that one hurt. That one I still kind of regret. Like every time I think of, I have pictures of me holding it, and like I have a picture of me with Stan Lee. So I'm
So, I
like,
mean, at least you've got evidence of
right.
you
Like
had
when
this,
my son's
but
older, yeah, he can be like, okay, you don't have like a crappy collection, like you had it, but you sold it. Like,
right.
yeah.
No, that's that. Yeah, I can see how that would be depressing. Like, I've got a couple expensive ones, but it's most of those were gifts,
Yeah.
because we don't make a whole lot of money here at the Indie Inkwell. But so when you decided to start creating your own books and writing your own, what made you decide to go the self-published route rather than trying to pitch something to like maybe Image or Boom or one of the indie publishers?
So I did, and I
Okay.
got like a rapid rejection. So like
Oh, okay.
what yeah, so what I did was I wrote Lockjaw, and like I was taking Scott Snyder's class. I had developed Lockjaw already because I went to school for film. So I had it as like a movie just kind of sitting there. And I thought it would do really well as like a comic because I was like, oh, he's got so many things I can do. I knew the formula to like set up a monthly. So I did that for that character. And then when I submitted it, like it was like rejection, rejection, rejection. And something I didn't notice early on is like everyone has their westerns. Like every
Mm,
major company like has theirs.
I didn't even yeah, that's a good point.
And
They
at the
really
time that I
do.
submitted mine, Snake in the Boot or like there's a Snake in My Boot, that comic came out at like the month that I submitted mine, that image like that comic dropped. So I was like, okay, they
Ah.
had like two westerns on the docket.
That was probably just bad timing on you.
Yeah, and then like Aftershock, as soon as I submitted it, the guy reached out to me like really nice. He's like, "Hey man, this is awesome. We got a western." He's like, "We already got stuff." So a lot of it was timing. So instead of like quitting, I was like, "Oh well, what's the worst that can happen if I finish it?" Like then I have one comic under my belt,
Mhm.
and then I'll take it from there. And then from there, it's just like shotgun, like bolt. Just like I just kept making other books, and then I got nervous to submit them, so I just started doing it myself. But it's funny because like now I'll like be at a show and somebody will come up, they're like, "Oh, I'm with so and so." I was like, "Oh, cool. They're like, this book looks nice." I was like, "You turned it down." I was like, no hate, no hate, but like
Right,
you,
right, like, I totally get it,
yeah,
business is business, it is what it is,
yeah,
but just to let you know.
yeah. This could have been yours. Like I would have been fine with that, but yeah, it happened like twice, and I was like, "Oh, this is funny." It's like that. If I had a dime for every time this happened, I would have two dimes. It's not a lot, but it's not like
Right.
weird that it happened. Yeah, it happened twice, and I was like, okay. I was like, so my books don't suck. It was just time. And like I submitted one of my titles today to like a few different publishers. And like it's already out. Like it's already under my banner of books.
Right,
Like
but trying to get, like, a distribution, publishing kinda
right.
license thing.
Yeah, because some of these books, like I just had C2E2
Mhm.
and I had a few
I know, I was
titles
supposed
sell
to be
out.
there, and I couldn't afford my hotel room this year, and I
It's
was just like,
expensive.
"Ugh."
Yeah, like
It's
C2E2 if
it's
you don't.
super expensive to stay in Chicago.
Yeah, it is. I drove because I live outside of Chicago, so I went from my house to Chicago back and forth every day just because I
Yeah,
was
see,
like,
I'm 7 hours away, that's not
yeah,
feasible.
no, no, that yeah. But, like, I had 3 titles, like, sell out, like, Lockjaw number 1. I have a book called, The Last Paletero on the Block, sold out first. I was like, "I didn't plan this out right." And then Starved Rock is, like, a constant sellout book for me because there's a state park in Illinois called Starved Rock, so when people see it, they buy it right away.
Because it's like a
Because 'Cause they're like,
local
"Oh."
deal.
Yeah, but it like, a constant that one I always order more because I know that'll go. So that's the book that I submitted because a lot of the feedback I get from fans after they've read it is like, "Where's the next issue? I really want it." And then some, like, friends that are writers have read it, and they're like, "That's the one that you gotta kinda push." So, putting it out there, hopefully it happens, but that's one that I submitted today. So I am still writing to submit, but now if I get a rejection, I'm like, "Well, I'll sell it myself and see if it has legs." And a
Right,
lot of times that yeah.
so it's almost like using yourself as kind of like your own sounding board,
Yeah.
your own little test market. Like, let me see what this will do. And then if it's got some legs to it, then I'll submit it and see what happens with a publisher.
Yeah, and the nice thing is since I have it at a table and it's just like me and a buyer across from me, I get to learn my pitches pretty fast because they don't wait around to like talk to me. They're just like, I have 100 other booths I want to go to. This caught my eye. What is it? And then I have to throw it out there as fast as I can. Like, this book is about this, and this.
Yeah.
Like Lockjaw, like my fast pitch for that is it's a mariachi singer that fights monsters with a silver string guitar. And if that doesn't catch them, nothing will. And then they're
Right.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. Or I'll tell them it's like a supernatural desperado, and they're like, got it.
So y'all
Yeah.
are getting some knowledge here. These are good little like pieces of information for people trying to make their own books.
Yeah. Rejection doesn't mean death. It just means it's not the right time for the person that was reading your pitch.
Yeah, another good example of that, not in the comic book scene, but the podcast scene. When I first started, I was with a different company, and I reached out to creators PR guy about getting them on the podcast because, you know, they had put a Twitter post up saying they were interested in getting their creator out on some shows. And when I sent in the thing, they sent me a rejection saying your audience isn't big enough. Well, about 6 months later, that same person wanted on the show for themselves.
Oh.
And I was like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I thought I didn't have a big enough following for you, man. Like, I didn't say that to him. I didn't mention it. We had him on the show. We did it, and you know, it was fine. But it's just one of those things. Like, people don't really pay attention until someone else starts paying attention. Sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. I had a fun moment like that, and not to like name drop or anything, but
no, that's why I didn't mention any names right there. Like, it's.
But I was doing a horror show in March, and I was like at my booth. I was like working my butt off trying to sell, and we were having like the sales of our lifetime at that point. Like on that Saturday, we were close to like 100 and something comics that we had sold for the day. So I was like, this has never happened before. Like I was like freaking out because every booth is like me, my wife, and my 3-year-old. So like I don't have people that witness me doing these things. It's just word of mouth. And then around the corner, I hear someone go like, John. So like turn around, and Colin Bunn is a buddy of mine. Like I
know exactly who Colin Bunn is.
He's awesome. Like I signed up for his Patreon. He read a lot of my pitches, gave me notes. Like he's been a buddy, but I never got to meet him in person. And he just happened to be in Chicago for that show as a fan of horror. Like he
just there, like at the convention, hanging out.
Yeah, and he was like, "Oh man, like I've been watching you like sell. Like I just like from a distance because I didn't want to mess you up." He's like, "I just kind of like peeked in on you." He was like, "You're doing the thing." He was like regardless of how you feel about how things are going with like your thing, he's like, "You always had a line of a few people waiting to buy or to talk to you." He's like that's a sign of success. Like you should be proud of that and like keep that. And it doesn't feel like it when you're like sitting at your desk at your house, like. I'm a writer. Yeah. But then like every once in a while, I'm like, oh yeah, I had like that really cool moment. Like hold on to those because there's so few and far between. Like if you're trying to write and you're watching this, like little successes will build up. And then eventually, like you said, somebody will take notice. And then that's going to move you like a little bit further and a little bit further. Yeah. There's very few springboards that just like launch you. Like everyone thinks like Donny Cates just like shot up down the ladder, but he wrote Star Trek issues.
He had to grind it out for quite a while on stuff he didn't want to work on. Like,
yeah, which I'm ready to do. I always joke like if they want to make Air Bud into a comic, like I will write the hell out of that. Like, just give me give me any property. Like I'll do it. I'll put my whole heart into it. I'll make it the best issue I can. I'm ready.
No, 100%, man.
Yeah,
because especially like sometimes you just need the reps.
Yeah. I need to meet editors, like
especially early on doing podcasting. I would have anybody on,
Yeah.
like even if I didn't really like the book. I'm like, yeah, come on. I need the repetition. You know, I need the practice.
Yeah, we gotta get it figured out, so we'll learn it together, kind of a thing.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, and then once I started having like more serious creators with more serious projects on, by that time I was like, okay, now I'm more comfortable doing this.
Yeah.
I've gotten past the point of caring if that, view count up at the top of the screen says 0. Like, I don't care anymore.
People tune in, people tune out. I know a lot of times when I'm watching something, I'm like in the middle of something. I was like, oh, I got to text someone back, and then I come back.
Yeah.
So you get used to like the ups and downs of it all.
Yeah, and I imagine it's the same with comic books. I mean, especially going to conventions and trying to sell things. I can't imagine it's like every time you go to a convention, you're making a profit, you know? Like,
No, I have done some library shows, and library shows are nice because they're free to get in,
mhm.
but they're harder to sell at because people usually go there because it's free. So
And they're
you
bringing
might
like their
sell.
kids and
Yeah. So it's tougher. But then like I'll do a show where I think, okay, I'm gonna do really good here. I was like, they have wrestlers here. I got a lucha comic. It'll click. And it doesn't click. And then I'm like, I should give it up. And then I'll do another show and I'm just like, oh, like that was weird. Like we did pretty good. So
yeah.
it's not, yeah, it's more so if I have a bunch of really good interactions with people, I'll feel better. Cause I've had people that met me at like a small toy show that like found me at C2E2 because they're like, oh, I bought from you in Bridgeview at like that Toy Con. They're
Mhm.
like, and I want to know if the new issue's out, so I came to see you. And I'm like, oh, cool. So I have people that like will at least follow me some steps, which is nice.
Oh, yeah, because I've gone to quite a few of those library shows that you're talking about, and even if I'm broke, I go in and network with people.
Yeah.
You know, like, you go in and you just talk to all the people that are there, like, selling their stuff, and a lot of them are just happy to, like, either get, a business card transaction or,
Yeah.
like, something.
Yeah. Doing these podcasts is not something you think about when you're like starting out to write your comic.
Mhm.
Cause in your head, you're like, oh, as soon as this is done, I'm gonna be signed for Marvel or DC. And like that's it. They'll book me on stuff. It's not
Right.
that. Like you gotta write your stuff, you gotta do the work, and then you have to talk about it. Cause if you don't talk about it, your book is just gonna sit on your table. So
Yeah, and I mean, you can go on all the podcasts you want, but if you don't tell people you're going on those podcasts, you're only gonna get so many viewers, especially in the
yeah.
comic book world. I mean, it's not a very large podcasting market, and it's
Yeah.
not a very lucrative podcasting market at the moment. So it's like, if you're gonna do that, expect to blow up just off doing podcasts about your book, then you're gonna have to go on to every single podcast you can find. It's gonna become a full-time gig.
Yeah, and then I always feel weird talking about my books because it's like
Oh,
everyone
we're
thinks
getting to that part.
writers. Yeah. Well, everyone's like writers have to be like self-deprecating. Like,
I
yeah,
don't agree with that.
I'm a tortured writer kind of guy. Whereas now I'm like super excited. I'm like,
I was
she's
gonna
a
say, if you're
wrestler that
happy and
fights
excited about
aliens.
the book, that's great. Like,
Yeah.
I think
No,
a writer or an artist should be excited about their project. Because if
which
you're
is what
not
I tell
excited about
people.
it trying to pitch it to somebody, why would they be excited about it?
Yeah, you have to be like your number one fan
Yeah,
of, yeah.
100%.
And if you can't be, then relook at it and see why you wrote it because chances are you'll find it again.
Yeah, it goes back to the whole thing, like, if you're not enjoying yourself, then what are you doing?
Yeah. And there's definitely been like times where I'm like writing a page and I'm like, ugh, there's so much exposition. And then I'm just like deleting it. I was like, no one can tell me no. Like I
Exactly.
don't have a bus yet. So they're gonna do this on a hot rod and I'm gonna just throw them somewhere. And I can do it. And that's like the fun part of being able to do it. So
No, that's awesome. So, right before we start getting into some of these books, because you sent me, I think, everything you've got out right now.
yeah.
So, I didn't get a chance to read everything, but I read like 4 or 5 of them.
Nice.
And, how did you gather up these creative teams, man? Because this is some interesting stuff, and it's some unique stuff as far as, like, the horror genre goes with some of it.
Yeah.
But then you've
So
also got some stuff in there that, like, I wouldn't say necessarily kids could enjoy, but, like,
yeah.
younger
I
audience.
I have some all age books because I have a 3-year-old. So I'm like, oh, I know parents at these shows are stressed out of their mind because they're just trying to walk through the like alleyways. So I'm like, if I have something that can be like, hey, that's perfect for like a 5-year-old, they can grab it. Like we wrote this book called Cryptid Crossing, and it's like a brother and sister that come
That's one of
across
the ones I didn't
cryptids.
get a chance to read yet.
It's a fun one. They're short. They're only like 8 to 10 pages because like they're for the kids.
Right.
So I kept them short, but like I have that for like the young ones. But the way I found my artists were I just went on Instagram and I just typed in sequential art. And then this
Ah.
guy, Medson Lima, showed up. So I like shot him a message. I was like, hey man, I saw you kind of drew like this Western photo. I'm working on a Western. Like, what do you think? like if we did it together. And he's like, send me the script. I'll read it. If I like it, we'll do it. He read it and he was like, this is pretty great. He was like, I like that he's not like a gunslinger. He's got like a guitar. He was like, this is fun. He's like, the drawing
Not
the
like your
horses.
typical
Yeah.
Western guy rolls into town. He's the new sheriff, got to take out the guy taking over the saloon, like
Yeah. I try to switch it up because even when he does try to be that, he's not. So it doesn't go well.
right.
Yeah. And then he mentioned, he was like, listen, I don't love drawing this horse. He was like, so if we don't
That's
need
something
him,
very common I hear from any artists in comics is that they hate horses. Like they do
I
not
can
like drawing horses.
it's hard. Like, I can't draw, so whenever they send me the horse, I always try to give him, like, really nice notes, like, "Hey, that's a great horse," and he's like, "Thank you. I
I
hate
was
it."
gonna say, yeah, because I can't draw either. Like my grandpa and my mother are both artists, and it just skipped me. Like,
Yeah, I have so many family members that are, like, amazing artists, so, like, my whole life, I was like, "It's gonna be a gene that just turns on, and I'll know how to draw a straight line, no problem." To this day, I'm just like, "Ruler, can't do it." Like,
right.
everything I draw, even when I write my signature, I'm like, "You can't even get that, like, to look awesome." So
So were you writing stuff like when you were in school too? Like was that like a little
yeah.
habit you had? You would like write little stories in class and stuff?
Yeah, I would, like, black out of, like, math class and all the stuff I didn't like and just write short stories
I
or,
feel like
like
all the things we all got in trouble for as kids is what we all ended up doing for like a career as
yeah,
adults.
because
Like I got in trouble for talking too much in class all the time. And
I
now
would
I on the process of being paid to talk to people. Like
yeah. I would write down, like, little stories and, like, pitch it to my friends and be like, "Oh, I'm writing this story." There was a show called, like, Metabots that was out when I was younger.
mhm. I
It was
remember
like
it.
a I was obsessed with it. So, like, I would write, like, little fan fiction stories and then give them to my friends so they could read it, and
Oh,
then they'd be
okay.
like, "That's awesome, do another one," and then I would just sit and, like, write stories because that's all I knew how to do. So, that's I love doing it from, like, then, and then when I got older, I went to school for film because I was like, "I'm gonna make movies." Like, I love cameras, I was a wedding photographer. I was like, "I'm gonna make movies." And then I realized, like, because I went to college late because, like, there was a period where I didn't know what to do. So then I started, like, trying to figure it out, and I decided to go back to school. My girlfriend, now my wife, was, like, super supportive. She's like, "Go ahead." But when I graduated, I was like, "I'm too old now to be a PA on set." Like, I wanna get married. I wanna, like, have kids. I wanna live life now.
I was
I
saying
was
for
like,
what I hear about the PA career field, it's not exactly glamorous or
yeah.
flexible with the schedule.
I have a bunch of friends that I graduated with that did go in at, like, the appropriate age that are now, like, successful, like, film set people because
Right.
they did it young. So, like, I missed that window, but I took everything that I learned there about, like, storytelling, about, like, framing, and now I put it into the comics. Like, I don't overwrite my scripts to be, like, looking down over this, wide shot, medium,
Describing
3
like
post.
camera angles and stuff.
Yeah, I give that to my artists to do. Like, I just tell them, like, "Hey, there's gonna be I want a lot of emphasis on the face to really show, like, how he's feeling," and then they judge it by what they really wanna draw, which is usually, like, someone getting, like, punched through something. They're like, "Yeah, that's gonna be awesome." I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's gonna be awesome." So, I'll adjust scripts too based on what I know they like to draw or hate to draw, because sometimes they'll
That's
give me
cool
a
because I
page.
know not all creatives are willing to alter their vision, like that. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I love my artists, like, all of them bring something unique to the table. There's one guy, Marcus Rosado, who's, like, the artist on most of my books. He did, like, my Cinema Muertes, Llorona, The Last Paletero. He did an Americana short, and he did one of the Lockjaw shorts. So he's on a lot of my books, but now basically I give him the script almost like the Marvel method, where it's just like, "This is what's gonna happen. Here's the dialogue. Good luck."
Make it happen.
Yeah, and then, like, he'll come back and he always hides references to, like, our other works in all the pages, and then I'm like, "This is awesome that you found a way to, like, tie it to our other stuff because I know you care." Like, the first issue
Right.
of Llorona, when he sent me, like, the first pages, there's the guys from, like, the Cinema Muerte crowd, like, up in the bleachers, and I was like, "That's awesome." Like, that means a lot to me that he cares too.
Well, because a lot of people that I've seen some instances of this where it's really, really like glaringly obvious. and some where it's more subtle. They tried to hide the fact, but like you could tell when somebody's just a hired hand on something
Yeah.
and they're not really like that passionate about what it is, because
Y-
they won't do that kind of stuff. They won't put little Easter eggs in there without being asked. Like,
Yeah. And there's definitely like different like levels of passion for like storytelling, because
mhm.
I think a lot of people go into comics thinking that it's going to be easy because they're like, oh, it's like Dragon Ball Z, it's just like Invincible, it's just like this, and then they hand it to me. I'm like, no, like this is exactly like those. Like you
This is
got to
this
find
is plagiarism. Like,
yeah. I was like, you even did spiky hair. Like, let's back it up a little bit and we'll like find the thing that you love about Dragon Ball Z. Like maybe it's Goku's like optimism and
right,
borrow that for your character. Like optimistic characters are great. So he can be optimistic, but he doesn't have to be super sane all the time. Let him
right,
be
with
vulnerable. Let
gold
him be,
spiky hair and an orange jumpsuit on.
yeah, like switch it up. And then every once in a while, somebody will come back and be like, I did that. And then they'll give it to me. I'm like, hey, awesome. I can't help you sell it, but like, I'll buy a copy. That's great.
Right.
Yeah. But it's the people that really want to tell stories will find a way to take the thing about another story that they like and do it. Robert Rodriguez has like he did an interview with John Carpenter, who's like his number one guy, and he was breaking down how many of his shots from Carpenter he stole from different various things and like popped it into his work. And I was like, okay, I'm glad to see that we all do that, because there's definitely like if someone asked me to explain Americana, I'd be like, well, if you've ever read Stephen King, it's that. Like, yeah. But I want to write different genres. I don't want it to all just feel like the same type of horror. Like a Starved Rock and Americana are two different books, but in the same genre, but
Mhm.
they have different feelings to them completely. So like to me as a writer, I wanted to prove that I could do both. So I did it.
Yeah, because nothing I read seemed like a carbon copy of anything else that you put sent to me.
Yeah,
Like,
I
there
tried
were
really
some that were,
hard.
like, similar, like, themed or whatever, but they
Yeah.
weren't, like, the same story with different faces on them.
I can tell what books I wrote within like 3 months of each other because the thing that I was writing about in one shows up in the other. Like themes like parenthood is a theme that kind of runs through a few of my books, or
Mhm.
like fear of parenting kind of a thing is in a lot of them. And then like now that I realize that when I start writing something and it starts to lean that way, I just kind of like go back a little bit and see if there's another way to kind of go down that avenue that I haven't been to before. And then like Americana 3 I'm working on now, and it's like I'm scripting it, and I noticed that I'm kind of revisiting some old territory. So I switched it up and now I'm like super happy with where it's going.
Well, that's good, though, that you can, like, kinda catch yourself in that, because not everybody can.
Yeah, I really try to hold myself as accountable as I can. Like before handing something to the artist, I'm like, are they gonna want to draw it? Or are they gonna be like, oh, it's another like ghost scene. So before I do that to somebody, I'm like, what would I want to read this far into a book? And how can I give that to my reader with still keeping true to the story?
Right, because I imagine as an artist, they would get monotonous on some projects, that especially like a longer project where you're drawing the same characters over and over and over again. So if it's just the same scenario repeating itself in slightly different ways, I could see how that would get really tedious really fast.
Yeah, I try to spice it up. And sometimes I'll even ask them, like, what do you guys want to draw that you haven't done yet that fits within like the world of this book?
Right,
And
like give me
then
some suggestions or some ideas.
yeah, because I can work in it because it's collaborative. And I think that's one of the most important things is like me and my artists have to be able to be honest with each other. So
Mhm.
like I tell them, like, hey, this is what this issue is gonna be. This is what I've written. You read it. And then they're like, hey, you have fighting like a mantis. Instead of a mantis, could it be a spider? And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Mantis weren't important. So I go back, I change it, and I give them what they wanted to draw because then they like knock it out of the park.
Oh, yeah, you give them that freedom and they can just run with it.
Yeah. Especially the guys that I'm working with are like really, really pushing for it. And I got like a newer thing coming out. And like the girl that's like drawing it is just she read the script and she saw what I was thinking and she's like, here you go, it's done. I was like, yeah, like it is. Even like the cover, I gave like basic notes and then she gave it to me and I was like, oh shit. I was like, okay, yeah, like You got it. Like, it was ready to go. So now it's in coloring. So I'm like super happy.
Oh, you gotta love it when things operate that smoothly. I mean, shoot, that's
Yeah.
rare for anybody in any field.
Yeah.
But speaking of your field, let's get into the books and the publishing house. Give us kind of the origin story of Aviña Comics. How long have you been actually putting out books? And kind of, if you can go book by book if you want, you can give us some overall. But if you want to do synopsises, I got covers of all of them, but you sent me so much, I didn't know what artwork to pull from what. So I just
It's
pulled
all good.
all the covers so everybody could see what all you got.
That works. So it was during the pandemic. I was a wedding photographer full time, and I lost all my weddings. All of them faded because people couldn't gather. My mom's a funeral director, so she was like, "Hey, I'm getting like slammed with work, and I don't know what this COVID is like, but I need help." So I dropped the weddings and I joined her at the funeral home where I still work. And it's like I needed something creative. Like I was drowning in the work. I was getting like real depressed and bummed out.
I can imagine that would
Ye-
be a rather
Yeah,
depressing environment if you don't have some kind of outlet.
yeah. And at the same time, Scott Snyder's like, I don't know what this is, but I'm gonna do a writing class because like I want to meet you guys. I need to tell stories. And I signed up right away. Like first, as soon as I could sign up, I think it
Was
was
he
like the
charging
fifth.
for that?
Yeah,
Okay.
at first, like, there was, like, a VIP thing where it was, like, $200, sign up, we'll meet once or twice, and you could pitch to me. So I bought that as soon as I could, and I pitched him Lockjaw, and it was, like, it's a story about a bard traveling the West, and he's got, like, a silver string guitar. It's kind of a Western, but it's a supernatural desperado, and he's like, "That sounds crazy, do it." So I wrote it.
You can't get much better validation
Oh, man, I was, like,
than
I was
Scott
telling
Snyder
everybody.
telling you, "Yes, make that. That's a good
Yeah,
idea."
I was
Like
like yeah, and I know he was, like, being nice because he didn't know what the story was. I didn't have it fully developed, but I had, like, a synopsis.
No, but
And
somebody like that, I'm sure they could put a picture together in their head from
right,
somebody's basic sales pitch, and
yeah,
they're like, "If I can think of a way to make that work, this guy can find a way to make it work."
and I've given it to him since then, and, like, he's been like, "Oh, this is so cool." Like, I haven't talked to him about it at all or any I'm still in the class, like, I still signed up for it because now
Uh-huh.
it's just cool to be able to do, like, the one-on-one thing, but it
Right.
was like, I did Lockjaw, and like I said earlier, I submitted it everywhere, and it got rejected almost immediately. And I was, like, bummed out. I was like, "Okay, well, maybe everyone's got a Western. Maybe I should write a horror book." Because at the time, I wasn't going to comic book stores, so I was pretty out of the loop about what was going on in, like, the indie scene, like, what images
Right.
putting out. So then the next book I did was Cinema Muerte, and that one was just kind of like this, like, a buddy comedy set at a comic book store during the apocalypse.
I
And
mean, how could you go wrong with that?
yeah, so I loved it. And I submitted that one to maybe one place, but I felt so personal about it that I kept it for myself. And now we're on like issue 3, and I'm gonna keep going with it as like my own book because I love it so much. And then after that one, we did that Americana book. And from there, I don't know what happened. I just kind of blinked and we did like 26 books. Because my wife helps me when we go to the tables, and she was like,
Right.
"When did this come out?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, no, like, that artist is great." And she was like, "Okay, but, like, when did you do it?" And I was like, "I don't know." Like, the time period, because I did one Kickstarter for any of these. It was, Lucha Forever I did a Kickstarter for, and I think that's the book I'm kind of the most known for is the Lucha Forever. So that one's about a wrestler who leaves the lucha world behind to make it as like an actor. Like he really wants to be like Sylvester Stallone. Like that's the actor that shows up in the book because of the physicality. He always thought he could make that leap to doing like the dramatic Rocky role.
Sort
It
of like
never
Hulk
happens
Hogan
for him.
tried to do back in the '80s, and it just didn't
Exactly.
work.
Yeah, and he ends up selling all of his memorabilia because he was the Hulk Hogan of
Yeah.
Lucha Libre.
This is one of the ones
And
I got a chance to read. I really liked this one. I'm a wrestling fan too, so
oh, nice. We have
this
the
one was
belt
fun.
behind me. I actually made a Lucha Forever belt.
Oh,
So,
that's
like,
so awesome.
as soon as the Kickstarter ended, I was like, "That would took a lot out of me. I need something." So I made the belt, I made the mask, but that book Like, that's one of the books where on the outside it looks like, oh, it's a lucha guy that fights aliens. But when you read it, it's like the story about a dad who's kind of risking it all
Mhm.
to make it in the arts. And I was like, well, I know where that idea came from. like like that didn't take me long to figure out. And then like it was that book, and then everything else like just kind of came out of me. Like every fear, doubt, everything had its own story. And I remember I did this book called Dead Man's Marquee, and it's one that I really love. It's like a very personal story that I'm into. It's like a noir revenge tale. But at the time, I was looking up who owned the rights to Zorro because like I do a lot of Latin comics, and I was like, that's my Batman. Like that's the grail for me, obviously. I want to know more about it. I reached out and it was a nightmare. I basically, from the moment I submitted, I got like an immediate cease and desist because
Oh,
they were
wow, like, just for asking.
just for asking, because they were like, listen, Marvel or not Marvel, like what's the name of the guy? He did like Batman White Knight or something like that.
Oh,
Sean Murphy. Sean Murphy. He was doing a Zorro. So they're like, you're gonna compete with that. Disney bought the rights to Zorro, and like Wilmer Valderrama was gonna play it. They're like, so we're releasing it out everywhere that we want it to go because we're gonna make money off of it. Don't touch it. And I was like, but Zorro, in a sense, is public domain. Like he
he's been
is,
around since what?
yeah.
Like,
For
1800s, right?
yeah, like early 1900 stuff because he was there after the Mexican like War of Independence is kind of when he sprang up. But then like somebody was like, "Oh, he actually wrote it." Like the guy that wrote Zorro, like wrote it and then based it on a person off this Joaquin like Marquez guy. And I was like, well, let me see what his life was about. And maybe that's my avenue in is to make it as close to the original story as possible.
Right.
That guy lived a terrible life. Like they killed his wife, they killed his brother, they burned down his house,
Oh
he
my
became a
god.
bandit, and then they beheaded him. So I was like, well, I can't.
Jesus.
Yeah, I was like, that's not in Zorro.
Not at all.
No. And then I watched like the Antonio
Zorro always
Banderas.
wins, like
Yeah. And then, like, to me, Zorro was Mexican because he fought in Mexico. And then they're like, no, he's a wealthy Spanish landowner that cares about Mexican people. I was like, well, that didn't exist at the time. That's why there was a
I was
war.
gonna say, I don't think that was a thing, was
So
it?
it,
Like
no, so it fired me up in a way that I was not expecting. And then Dead Man's Marquee became that story where it's a story about a guy who was left for dead. And he wakes up and he finds out that his life story was turned into a movie, which Zorro was like 3 years after the book came out and like blew up. It was one of like the first like black and white like movie things.
yeah.
And it was like an American guy playing a Spanish guy protecting Mexicans. So I was like, there's too many things going on here for me to like not talk about it. So I
Right.
did, so I wrote that book, but then like after I released it, I was like, oh, no one's really talking about it. I was like, oh, because one, I'm not talking about it because I was so mad at the time. I was just like, it was like my
It was something you
anti-Zorro book.
almost put out of spite.
Out of spite. So now that I'm doing the next issue, I'm like walking it back. I was like, it's a story about a guy. So now it's Phantom of the Opera, but set in like a 1940s movie studio. So like I found my way to like save that story. But for a while, I didn't even question why that book got rejected. I was like, oh no, I was hot when I wrote it. Like
Like, I was not happy. Like
that book had like my first time ever writing like sex scenes and stuff was like in that book.
ah.
And because I was like, it's got to be gritty, it's got to be dark. And then when I finally like woke up and read it, I was like, okay, I see what I did here. I know the story. I can save
Don't make
this.
decisions out of anger, ladies
Don't
and
do it.
gentlemen.
Yeah, because like I wrote Americana. That's like my favorite book. That's like my personal baby is Americana,
Right.
and I wrote that one out of like this sense of like grief of like I've jumped so far into this well of making comics that I don't know how I'm ever gonna come out of it. Like if I don't get like the success that I need to like make it out of here, what have I done? So that book became that kind of avenue for me to tell this story, but it was also a movie that I wrote in college. So I took the script, I threw out a lot of stuff that like fit as a movie wouldn't work as a comic, and then I like readapted it, and then through the son in that story, it's about the love of living, and that's what kind of got me through it. I was like, the dad can be like the voice of my generation, which is just like everything's on fire, what's happening. And the son still has like this painful optimism of like life isn't that bad. I can still be in nature. Like I can still go outside and just look up and be like wowed by the beauty of life.
Right.
So writing the two balances me out because that book has some dark stuff in it. And I'm just like, okay, this is my balance. This is like my yin and yang of this book. And writing the dynamic of that is kind of how I like flowed through it.
That's cool though, because something you made out of complete anger
Yeah.
has turned into something actually that, productive. That's a good thing though.
Yeah. And like each book, because after like the Lucha Forever of it all, because at the time Lucha Forever came out, I had Cinema Muerte, Lockjaw, and Americana out. And then from there, all the other books started to just like explode because I was like, oh, and then like I wrote this horror story called Loteria. And it's about a curse like card game. It's like Mexican bingo. But I was like, oh, it's gonna be like about the inner workings of social issues within like the Latin community and how we deal with it, which is by like being mean to each other. And then at the time I was watching a lot of like 90s horror movies, and I thought like how cool would it be to tell that story through like the filter of a 90s horror movie? Like an I Know What You Did Last
And
Summer
this
or
is another one
Scream.
I got the chance to read because I was like, this reminds me of Scream so
Yeah.
much. Like,
Yeah, especially that opening sequence where
yeah,
it's a text. Because I was like, I gotta modernize it. Because if my siblings who are younger than me read it, they're gonna be like, "Who calls anymore?" Like that would give me anxiety. And I was like, "All right, dial it down." Because like I'm older than a lot of my like siblings and stuff. So I was like, "All right, dial it
I
down."
was saying, trust me, I'm 33. When I talk to some of my buddies' kids who are
Yeah,
like 10, 11, 12, I'm just like, wow, we had completely different childhoods. Like,
my buddy brought his daughter over, and she was 14, and she was super into Pokemon. I was like, "Dude, she's gonna be fine here. I love Pokemon."
right.
So she was like, "Well, who's your favorite?" And I was like, "Oh, Dragonite." She's like, "Yeah, you're old." And I was like, "What happened to Dragonite? Like, why don't we like
Why is
Dragonite?"
Dragonite not okay anymore?
Yeah, she's like, "Well, he's not even cool." And I was like, "Well, who's cool?" And then she showed me someone, and I was like, "I'm pretty caught up, but I don't know that guy's name." And like,
Right.
I can tell
Well,
he's a
there's
rock type.
also like what, over 1,000 of them now. So
It's insane. I don't have the capacity for it. So she's like,
no.
"But," she's like, "Yeah, you're a Gen 1 follower." And she's like, "I'm on whatever the
Wait,
newest one
hold
is."
on, hold on. They've got like slang terminology for us in the Pokemon world now.
Yeah, it hurts.
Wow.
Yeah, because she was like, "Well, who was your
We were the
first?"
original Pokemon kids.
And that's why I felt cool because I was like, I was there when it came out. Like, I remember going to Toys R Us, buying the game, popping it into the
Yeah.
Game Boy, and like that was it. That's
I
all I
got mine
did
at a
from.
store called Funko Land that doesn't even exist anymore.
They had a Funko Land here. I was a big
Yeah.
supporter of Funko Land. Yeah,
They had a lot of my used games in that store.
yeah. But like when I realized how old I was, I started to like address that in some of the works. So like Loteria, they're younger in Familiar Dungeons, which is my newest book.
Another one I got to read because I also like a Dungeons and Dragons fan who's never been able to actually play Dungeons and Dragons. So anything related to it, I consume immediately.
Well,
Like,
I'm gonna send you because the nice thing is for that issue, anyone that buys it either online or through the TikTok shop, I wrote a one-shot D&D adventure that
oh,
comes with it.
cool.
That comes with the book. So it comes with like a real simple way to play it. All you need is a dice that has odds and evens, or a
Okay.
D20, so you can do like 10 and under like that.
I'll say I got
And
plenty of dice for the game because I don't know why, but every mystery box I ever buy at a convention has
comes with dice.
D&D dice in it.
It's an easy ad. So like I have that for people because I was like, how am I gonna sell a D&D book to people who haven't played? I was like, oh, give them an avenue in. So I was like, I wrote this one-shot adventure, and like when I was younger and played D&D, I always thought it would be so easy to write a module. I was like, oh, I'm gonna write the rule book and do my own thing. It's gonna be so easy. It is not because
There's
like
so much to think about.
it's not a script. You have to write it like a web. So you start in the center, you go into a
Yeah.
cavern, and then boom, 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 boom.
It's like the people who
Eh,
made Baldur's Gate 3, which I just
oh my
finally
god,
beat. It's like, I don't know how you even kept all that straight.
no. Like, there's
like,
you know that thing of, like, Charlie Day smoking in front of the wall with all, like, the
yeah,
little thing? That's how I felt writing it, and I was just writing it for people that might buy a comic. So I was
right.
just sitting there like, "Oh my god, what have I done?" Like, it
Like you
it
just
was it was
created
supposed to
this
be
monster for yourself.
it was supposed to be 1 page, and the original draft was, like, 6 pages. I was like, "No one's gonna read this. This is too much." So I got it down to, like, a simple 1 page, but at C2E2, it was nice because some people would be like, "Oh, I don't really know how to play D&D. I want to," and I was like, "Guess what? Here it is. Here's your avenue in." And
That's
I gave
awesome.
everyone at the show a D20 that bought it.
See, you're bringing fandoms together at that point.
I'm trying because like, I have to be different because I am an independent comic book creator, so, like, a lot of my stuff steers away from superheroes because it's such a flooded market that I
And it's
don't think
so hard to stand out
it
with a
is.
superhero. Like, I've read
Yeah.
some recently that were pretty good, but it's like, it's just so hard.
Yeah, it's and then everyone thinks, like, the power base is, like, what's gonna captivate it, like, I would read just Peter Parker having a bad time because I could relate, like, I need to know who's under the mask
Read
more than I need to
Spider-Man Blue,
know.
and
Yeah,
that'll
oh,
do it for
man.
you right there.
Yeah, I bought all of those, like, back to back, the Spider-Man Blue, Daredevil Yellow, and, like, Hulk Gray, because I thought, "Oh, cool," like, it's like like, a cool version of it. I was, like, bummed out. I was
Yeah,
just, like,
dude,
sitting at
every
home
single
and
one of those is like, "Dang." By the end of it,
yeah,
you're
it's just
crying, like
yeah, but a lot of my favorite issues of books are the ones that, like, make me feel something visceral, where I'm
Oh,
just
yeah, I mean,
like
if I don't feel something from a book I read, then I'm probably not gonna even review it.
my favorite book that came out last year is a book called Come Home Indio by this, author, Jim Terry. He's the artist for a lot of, Tim Seeley's books,
Okay.
like, the guy that d yeah, so he does a lot of his books, and I got to meet him. He did a Lockjaw variant for us, a really nice guy, but I
Nice.
saw he wrote a book, so I was like, "Let me read this," and it's so brutal. Like, it's an autobiography, basically, but it's so brutally honest, and I was like, "Well, that's who I wanna be when I grow up, is this guy who just, like, puts it all out there," and, like, at times I'm crying, but I know him, so I know he's okay, but I'm
Right.
like I was like, "That's what comics should do." Like, it's more than just, like, leaving me on the hook for the next issue, like, make me feel something, even if it just makes me feel happy that, like,
Yeah.
Spider-Man did a good job. Like, I need to feel it, and I think that's something that I can't do in superheroes yet, so I'm not gonna attempt it, but, like, eventually, that's something I do wanna do 'cause, when I started in college, I wrote a superhero web series because, like, the Guild was out and all these, like, web series were, like, popping off.
Yeah.
So, I shot my own, and I wrote a pilot, and we shot it. So, maybe I'll put it up one day, but, like, it's bad, but I tried my best. But it was one of those things
Sometimes
where,
bad stuff is good, though, like
yeah, well, it's like I did it, and I had no idea that Invincible was, like, a thing, but I was like, "It's about an everyday guy that finds out he's a superhero." I was like and then Invincible, like, fell into my hands, and I was like, "Oh, he did it."
yeah.
He did everything I would have done if I had thought about like, he nailed it, like, there's no room for me here. So I, like, backed off of that, but, like, I still wanna do superheroes eventually, but, like, I can't. Right now, I do a lot in horror because horror is kind of a universal language, and because so much of my stories are Latin, I feel like it might alienate some people or they might feel alienated by it, but that's why I was like, horror or sci-fi, because if I can get you with that, maybe I can show you something that you might not have seen because you're not used to it.
Right.
So that's kind of like why my books always feel like they're leaning towards like the gothic or the sad or the horror end. It's because like that's universal. Like everyone goes through grief. That's like my experience as a funeral director. And using that, I can get readers in because they'll see it and I'll be like, oh, it's a story about grief. They're like, oh, cool. Or it's a story about like loss in a deeper sense. And then people will come in. So I try to do that for as many books as I can because I don't want people to feel alienated because a lot of the titles have Spanish names. And that was
Yeah, for
something I was
sure.
like very, yeah, that was something I was very like aware of when I started. I was like, "Oh, Lockjaw's name is first because people won't know how to say pistoletto correctly." I was
Right.
like, "So they can just call it Lockjaw." And that works. A lot of times people are like, "Oh, Lockjaw's here." And I'm like, yeah,
But
sweet.
one thing I've noticed, especially like at least personally myself and with other people that I'm close to as a reader, I enjoy finding stuff that's not necessarily targeted towards me because I mean, let's face it, I'm just a random straight white guy. Not everything is made for me, even though some out there think it should be. I guess I don't. Anyway, we're not going to go down that route, but it helps me as an individual grow more because if I'm reading stories made by people that I may not necessarily interact with all the time or that I just don't know the history of, nobody knows the history of everybody. I'm sorry, we just don't.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but you know, like if it's a culture that I'm not familiar with or that I didn't grow up in, I want to read stuff from that because it helps me grow as a person.
Yeah, I wrote this story and I can kind of talk about it a little bit, but it's this girl finds out that her ex is getting engaged. So she agrees to go on a blind date with her like a guy that her sister sets her up with. But he's like a social media influencer like a Logan Paul type.
Okay.
So she's like really hesitant cuz she's like an artist and that's not her type, but she's like I just need a distraction. So she goes on the date. Turns out he's actually Zeus and the date goes sideways and she ends up getting cursed. So she wakes up and she's like a modern day Medusa. And I wanted to tell it because a lot of my stories are from like the just male perspective because I'm a guy. I'm not going to try to write something that I don't really understand because
Right.
I don't want it to feel like disingenuous or anything. So I talked to my wife about it a lot. I have 5 sisters, so I talked to them about like I'm going to try this thing, read it and guide me. Like if I do something that feels off, tell me. So like a lot of times when I was writing it, I kept writing that the girl's in like a hoodie or in like jeans or sweatpants. I tried so hard to make it like not sexualize the main character because she's not that. And I pitched it
Right.
originally to an editor, and the editor's notes are like, "Hey man, I don't know if you're the guy to tell it because you are just a guy." And but I told him I was like, I'm coming from it from a place of like I was raised by like a single mom. I have 5 sisters. My wife like reviewed the hell out of it, and all I did was put in horror stories from what they told me into here, and the rest of it's coded over my love of like Greek mythology and stuff. So then after that, they were like, "Oh, I see where you're coming from," and then they read it and they're like, "Okay, it's a good place." But I want to challenge myself to write outside of my norm, and that book is the one that the female artist like gave me the pages back, and I was like, "Oh shit." She's like, "Yeah, no, I knew what you were trying to say." She's like, "You did a good job saying it." Because I like every time she had some kind of input, I was like, "Yeah, like let's you're the audience. So if I can
Right.
give you something that you like that you want to tell, like then I know I'm doing the right thing." And then she was like, "Yeah," and she's like, "I know what you're trying to say. I know how you're gonna say it." She's like, "I can help you push it a little bit further." And that's what we did. So that book's gonna be coming out in like a month or so, but I'm really excited for it.
And that's how that process should go. Like if you're writing a story about something that you don't have firsthand like experience of or knowledge of, you have to ask somebody who's been there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely like for that one, that was actually like the 3rd comic I ever wrote, but it's barely coming out now because I went through like a ton of artists, and a lot of the male artists I gave it to were like emphasizing the body, and I was like, "Hey, like it's not that kind of a story." And then they would like scale it back, but then they would like she was picking up stuff a lot, and I was like, "This isn't right." Like
Yeah.
this isn't what this book should be. And then that's where I get picky with art too because I'm like I really need to feel it. Like it needs to feel right and it needs to feel honest to the character. And it took me a while and then I found this artist and she lives in like Italy, but she's done like so many Kickstarters that her schedule was like insane. I was like, "Do those, get your money, and then like we'll start doing this book together." And she gave me the last ink pages today. And I was
Oh,
like, "This
nice.
is like the coolest thing," because we already started coloring it. And I'm like, "This feels great."
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
So we're just about out of time. Before we go, is there anything else you want to plug or promote? And then where can people find you online? And do you have any advice for anybody trying to create their books for the first time?
So my advice to creating your book is even if you stumble while you're making it, finish it. The most important lesson you're going to learn in making anything is how to finish the project when you're kind of bogged down in the middle of it. So first and foremost, finish it and then give it to somebody else to read. because even if they don't give you feedback, even if you don't think they don't like it, being able to give something to someone that you wrote is terrifying. Even now, like every time I give someone a book or send them like that link I sent you, I'm always so worried that I'm gonna get like, man, this is bad. But
Oh, yeah,
even
I'm
if
always horrified one of my friends is gonna watch an episode of this show and be like, "Dude, that was a horrible interview."
yeah, like you never really get over it, but you learn to live with it because then you learn to be like, it wasn't for them. Maybe that, or maybe I did miss the mark or whatever.
Right.
So get used to doing that as soon as you can and learn to get over it. I'm on like every social platform. TikTok. I just hit 10,000 today, so that was cool. But like, yeah,
That's not easy to do these days.
yeah, I'm getting there.
I'm
So
I'm
like,
not even at 4,000, so
you'll get there. It's just like I don't know how to figure out the algorithm, so I just like make a video about
Yeah.
whatever I'm doing and
I think
trying.
we're all going through that process with that app right now. Nobody
Yeah.
knows what's going on with TikTok right now.
But on all social platforms, it's under Aviña Comics. You can find me on there. And yeah, I have my first signing today or this weekend as like a writer where I got invited. So that's going to be cool. I'm going to be at Blurred's Comics in LaGrange,
Oh,
signing for Free
cool.
Comic Book Day. So that'll be awesome.
Awesome, awesome. And if you guys want to check out and support Aviña Comics, you can do that at their Patreon page. Right here, you can scan the QR code on your screen. There will also be a link down in the description below this video. Or if you're listening on Spotify or other podcast platforms the day after this is aired, you can find a link down in the description of the podcast episode as well. And you can also go ahead and check out the comic shop of Aviña Comics over at that QR code that QR code on your screen. Sorry, mushmouth. And then you will also find links in the description for that as well. And if you want to help support the show, help us support the indie comic book community, stop by the merch store. You can scan that QR code on your screen right there. Links in the description. Get yourself a shirt or a sticker or a hoodie. And I think that's all we've got for you guys today. So please come by next week, same time, same channel. Be safe, be kind, and take it easy, everybody.